Venezuela has had a rocky history. From Spanish colonization in the 16th century to modern day, the area has never had any stability for too long. The country was plundered first by colonizers who took advantage of its riches, and then later by its own government and politicians who made some horrible decisions. Here's how Venezuela was slowly destroyed. A brief history of Venezuela. This small South American country is known for having some of the most beautiful natural attractions in the world, as well as a diverse indigenous population. Before it was colonized with the founding of Nueva Cadiz in the early 1500s, it was inhabited entirely by indigenous people. Soon, more Spanish settlements started appearing along the coast of Venezuela, and it soon became part of the CGV, aka Captaincy General of Venezuela, a colonial administrative division. Much like any other colonizers, the Spanish didn't spare Venezuela and exploited the region's riches. The land was robbed of everything from gold to even cacao and other agricultural products. Soon, the Spanish people introduced slavery to the region, and slaves were brought over from Africa. This went on for centuries, and Venezuelans were getting sick of being treated as less than by the Spanish colonizers. Several independence movements started sprouting up, and Venezuela eventually ended up participating in many of the Spanish-American wars of independence. The people kept resisting, until finally, in 1811, Venezuelans declared independence from Spain. After gaining independence, Venezuela became a part of the Republic of Gran Colombia, a federation that consisted of present-day Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama, with Bolívar as its leader. Sadly, the Venezuelan struggle didn't end after they declared independence, and turbulent times followed as Gran Colombia was dissolved. The 19th century was a tough time for the country, with political instability and civil wars running rampant. Things could have ended there for its people, but everything changed with the discovery of oil in the region in the early 20th century. Discovery of oil in Venezuela. In 1922, Royal Dutch shell geologists discovered oil in the Maracaibo Basin in the area. This changed the game for Venezuela. Before this, the country was battling the many challenges that followed it post-independence. The country was almost entirely reliant on agriculture, and cacao was the cash crop and leading export. This didn't allow for much development. As a result, there was social and economic inequality in the state, and a small elite known as the Mantuanos controlled most of the land and wealth. Not to mention, the majority of the population was living in poverty. As though all of that isn't enough, Venezuela was facing some major political challenges and everything was extremely unstable. Different governments came and went, yet nothing changed. Civil wars and uprisings didn't stop either. Thanks to the discovery of black gold, aka oil, in the region, things were finally taking a turn for the better, and the situation in Venezuela changed almost overnight. Soon after the discovery of oil, the annual oil production in the region increased rapidly. By 1929, Venezuela was second in terms of total oil output in the world, second only to the United States of America. Foreign companies started investing their millions into the region, and thanks to the help of General Juan Vicente Gomez, they did so without any worries. Of course, this wasn't sustainable in the long run, and Venezuelans soon realized this. In the 1930s, it decided it was high time to reclaim its oil rents. Soon, the hydrocarbons law was passed in 1943. This required foreign companies to give half of their entire profits to the Venezuelan government. This was great for the country because government income increased significantly, all while reducing the control that foreign powers had over Venezuela's oil. It was a win-win situation. Sadly, while this should have been a good thing for the South American country, things were still unstable politically, because a series of military dictatorships meant that there was no democracy in Venezuela. Emergence of democracy in Venezuela. Things got better in 1958 though, when the country's first ever democratic government came into power. This marked a significant turning point in the country's political history, as it ended a period of military dictatorships and ushered in a more stable democratic era. The 1958 elections and the subsequent Punto Fijo Pact which ensured democratic stability, played a crucial role in shaping Venezuela's political landscape for the following decades. Soon after becoming a democratic country, Venezuela joined OPEC and started coordinating oil prices with other major oil-producing nations. The country established its first state oil company, the Venezuelan Petroleum Corporation, and increased oil companies' income tax. This eventually led to Venezuela becoming a petrostate. Venezuela's economy reaches new heights. Thanks to this newfound vigor in the oil industry, Venezuela's economy started to improve. In the 1970s, the country experienced a remarkable economic boom because of an important event. An OPEC embargo was initiated in response to countries supporting Israel during the Yom Kippur War, which resulted in a fourfold surge in oil prices. This sudden windfall led to an influx of money pouring into Venezuela. While this could have been a great opportunity for the country, things went downhill quickly. During this time, mismanagement and graft was rampant in the government, and it has been estimated that almost $100 billion had been embezzled between 1972 and 1997. Now, back to the 70s, when President Carlos Andrés Pérez made a noteworthy decision in 1976. He nationalized the entire oil sector, putting Petróleos de Venezuela, S.A., PDVSA, in charge as the state-owned company managing the sector as a whole. PDVSA was important because it was set up to operate as a company with little involvement from the government, which would prevent corruption. The downfall of the 80s. Sadly, Venezuela's good luck only lasted a few years, because after the 80s, there was a sharp decline in oil prices all over the world. Inflation was the norm, and Venezuela's economy shrank. As it turns out, the country's idea to acquire foreign refineries wasn't the best, and nationalization wasn't a success. It led to Venezuela being in a lot of international debt, exacerbating the existing problems. Things got so bad that in 1989, President Pérez had to impose austerity measures in an effort to stabilize the economy, which led to violent protests. These economic and political upheavals got so bad that Hugo Chavez, a military officer, had to launch a failed coup attempt that would eventually catapult him to national fame. Venezuela's history during this period underscores its heavy dependence on oil, the volatile boom and bust cycles associated with oil wealth, and the far-reaching consequences of pivotal political decisions, notably nationalization and participation in OPEC, on the nation's economic and political stability. This overdependence on oil, coupled with decades of poor governance, have driven what was once one of Latin America's most prosperous countries to economic and political ruin. What is Venezuela like now? Fast forward to now, Venezuela isn't doing too well. Their recent economic collapse is marked by a 75% GDP shrink and extreme hyperinflation. It's a result of decades-long government mismanagement, US sanctions, and dwindling oil production. Even though oil was discovered over 100 years ago, it still is the main source of the country's fortunes. The oil industry isn't the most consistent though. Think back to 2014, when oil prices were over $100 per barrel.
Brent crude oil prices hit $100 per barrel for the first time since 2014.
But dropped to under $30 in early 2016. This triggered a severe economic and political crisis that persists, despite recent price rebounds. Fast forward to 2023, oil exports in the country are anticipated to finance nearly 2/3 of the government's budget. But because of bad investments and the downright horrible maintenance of the industry, its output has been on the decline in Venezuela. It fell by 2.5% in 2022 after a brief increase the year before, hitting its lowest levels in decades in 2020. Now Venezuela is billions in debt, owing about $150 billion or more. And although annual inflation has been somewhat controlled from over 130,000% in 2018, it's still really high, at 234% in 2022. While the economy grew by roughly 6% in 2022, experts forecast a further 6.5% growth in 2023. Despite these small improvements, Venezuela is still facing the challenges of years of political instability and ill-managed natural resources. Recovery isn't going to be easy, But those are the consequences of a failed petrostate.